Welcome to The Explainer, where we break down these big, complex stories using the source material itself. And today, wow, we are diving into a really wild investigative article that details the high-stakes, knockdown, drag-out fight between the AI giant Anthropic and the Pentagon. So, it all kicked off with this. On February 27, 2026, the U.S. government made a truly shocking move. And it started with this declaration from the Defense Secretary. Now, you gotta understand, this wasn't just some policy statement. This was basically the opening shot in a corporate war.
So that begs the question, right? How on earth did a major American tech company, one that was already deeply embedded in classified military networks, suddenly find itself labeled a national security threat? To get to the bottom of this, we've got to rewind.
Okay, let's go back to the summer of 2025, because back then, everything seemed great. The partnership was strong. The Pentagon had just given Anthropic this massive contract. We're talking up to $200 million. And its AI, Claude, was the only one of its kind cleared to operate on the military's most secret networks.
Now, the whole conflict really boils down to these two rules. These were Anthropic's core safety restrictions. They were super clear about them from day one, and the Pentagon knew all about them when they signed that giant contract. And for months, this wasn't a problem at all.
So what happened? Well, according to the source material, the entire relationship just shattered over one single question. After a military operation in Venezuela, a senior executive at Anthropic reached out and asked a pretty simple question. Hey, was our AI used in that raid? They saw it as a routine compliance check. The Pentagon? Oh, they saw it as a threat. They officially called it a rupture in their relationship.
And the Pentagon's response, well, it wasn't a negotiation. The author of this piece argues it was really the start of a premeditated countdown. They weren't looking for a compromise, they were setting a trap.
And here's the trap. This new contractual clause they came up with called all lawful use. On January 9, 2026, a memo went out demanding this language in all AI contracts. Now, this was completely fundamentally incompatible with Anthropic's two big restrictions, and everybody knew it. So this wasn't a negotiation, it was a countdown clock.
And that clock led to what one senior defense official called a shit or get off the pot meeting. The Pentagon basically delivered an ultimatum. Either you ditch your core safety rules, or we're going to brand you a supply chain risk. I mean, that's a legal sledgehammer they usually save for foreign adversaries like Huawei. And Anthropic CEO Dario Amodei, he refused. So what happens next? Literally hours after Anthropic's deadline passed, a new player publicly steps onto the scene, OpenAI. But as the source material lays out pretty clearly, they didn't just appear out of thin air. No, they had been waiting in the wings for months. And this slide just illustrates the difference perfectly. Publicly, OpenAI would say they had the same red lines as Anthropic. But when you look at the contracts, it's a whole different story. Anthropic insisted on a hard veto, the actual legal power to enforce its rules. OpenAI, on the other hand, just accepted the Pentagon's all lawful use language, basically handing over the keys. You could say Anthropic built a solid wall, OpenAI offered a flimsy fence the Pentagon could legally just walk around.
The author then points to something that happened the very next day, and they frame it as this central, damning contradiction in the Pentagon's entire case. And folks, this is where the story gets really, really wild.
Okay, so on Friday at 5:01 p.m., the hammer comes down. Anthropic is officially designated a supply chain risk. This move is designed to make the company totally radioactive, effectively barring thousands of defense contractors, think Boeing, Lockheed Martin, from doing any business with them.
But then, on Saturday, we're talking less than 24 hours later, U.S. Central Command used the exact same risky technology for intelligence analysis and target identification during major combat operations against Iran. Let that sink in. The tool they just banned was immediately used in a war.
So here's the crucial point, right? This massive contradiction. The Pentagon's whole argument was that Anthropic was a risk because they might, quote, turn off the lights during an operation. But that argument completely falls apart the second they keep using this so-called risky tech to conduct airstrikes. You can't have it both ways. The author uses a really strong term to describe the Pentagon's actions, corporate murder. And they argue that if this gets to a fair court, Anthropic has a really powerful case built on 4 distinct legal pillars.
So these 4 pillars are the core of the legal challenge. First, you've got statutory misuse. They used a law meant for foreign spies on an American company. Second, the whole thing was arbitrary and capricious, and the proof is that they kept using the tech. Third, tortuous interference. they illegally damaged Anthropic's private business. And fourth, viewpoint discrimination, punishing Anthropic for having a contractual backbone that OpenAI didn't.
And this timeline really lays out the author's case for this all being premeditated. It suggests this wasn't some sudden breakup, it was an engineered transition. While Anthropic was the star player, OpenAI was on the sidelines building a parallel system for months. They even brought in Elon Musk's XAI as another backup. And here's the key takeaway. The replacements were already in place before the ultimatum was even delivered.
So, what does this all mean? Well, the author argues that the outcome of this whole dispute is going to set a massive precedent. This is not just about a single $380 billion company, it's about the future relationship between the entire tech industry and the US government.
The takeaway, as it's presented in the source, is a really stark choice for Silicon Valley. The Pentagon has just shown that it is willing to use tools reserved for foreign enemies to crush a domestic company over a simple contract dispute. The message could not be clearer: surrender control or face commercial annihilation.
And that leaves us with the final, pretty provocative question that the article poses. Is this the moment that the line between Silicon Valley and the military-industrial complex just dissolves completely? It's a huge question, and its answer might not be decided in a boardroom anymore, but in a courtroom.